My name is Michael Dang, and I am the guest curator here at the Richmond Art Gallery for the show Unit Bruises, Theodore Wan and Paul Wong, 1975 to 1979. The show is on from April 20th until June 30th, and it focuses on two Chinese-Canadian artists that were working in and around Vancouver in the late 70s, Theodore Wan and Paul Wong. Both were inspired by contemporary art trends and currents of body and performance art, as well as conceptualism. And both of them were working in and around Vancouver in this time as well. So the title for the show was inspired by Kenneth Fletcher and Paul Wong's work, 60 Unit Bruise. It's a video work that was shot at Western Front in 1976. And in that work, Kenneth Fletcher, who was Wong's partner at the time, removes 60 units of blood from his arm and injects it into Paul Wong's back, and it comes with a big sort of purplish bruise. And that was one of the first video works that Paul ever did, and that was sort of the work that was the impetus for this show, to be this bigger group show, but then we sort of narrowed it down to these two artists who I thought made a sort of an interesting pair with each other, because Paul was sort of working a lot with sort of video at this time, and Theodore was working a lot in photography, but both artists were sort of mobilizing the tropes of medical and surgical imagery. For example, you know, the needles in the Paul Wong work, the padded cube in his work Intensity from 1978, but also Theodore at this time was working in the Dalhousie School of Dentistry in Halifax, and that's how he got access to a lot of hospital paraphernalia and equipment, and he worked a lot in this era to sort of do these sort of self-portraits where he is the patient in these series of medically accurate surgical diagrams. And so I kind of thought that these two artists, despite, you know, their differences because they worked in much different fashions, I thought that they would be very interesting to put together, considering they've never been sort of paired together in a two-person show before. So Wan and Wong are often sort of kind of considered in different artistic circles in Vancouver at this time. But Wan and Wong were acquaintances, especially in the 80s, when Wong was associated with the Artist Run Center Video Inn, or the Satellite Video Exchange Society, which was in Chinatown at the same time as Theodore Wan had opened up his own artist run space called Main Exit. So Paul was talking about how he would see Theodore at openings and that sort of thing. But they were sort of more acquaintances. They're both sort of these visible minority figures in these hegemonic, dominantly white Canadian society and the dominantly white art world as well. They were seen as these sort of othered figures, and I think they sort of work with the same problem in much different ways. Even though they both use sort of medical and surgical imagery, I think, you know, someone like Theodore, who was, you know, trained formally, he got his BFA from UBC and he gets his MFA from NASCAD in Halifax. He almost sort of leans into these assimilationist values in almost sort of a comical or satirical degree. You can see it in a work like Name Change, which you'll see in the exhibition from 1977, in which he applied for official name change from Theodore Fu Wan to Theodore Saskatchewan Wan, as sort of this play on how a person who immigrates to Canada is supposed to sort of assimilate and identify with its land and its culture. And then you have somebody like Paul, on the other hand, who was very informed by like punk rock and the punk rock scene, and he was very sort of antagonistic towards these dominant values. And I think it's interesting how they both land in, I won't say the same way, but in very complementary or parallel ways. And that is to subvert these presumed objectivities of what is sort of scientific knowledge, institutional knowledge. The research for the show started with 60 Unit Bruise, which is the Paul Wong work. In the show, you'll actually see a sort of a new cut of 60 Unit Bruise. It's called Blood Brother, and it includes a work that was thought to be lost for 47 years called 50/50, which was a performance that Paul and Kenneth did on the same day, and they just recently sort of discovered it in the Western Front archives and sort of brought it out. For Theodore, I looked a lot at the Vancouver Art Gallery's libraries and archives, because they sort of hold a lot of Theodore's archives and what he left behind after he passed tragically in 1987. I talked a lot to people like Christos Dikiakos, who was one of Theodore's closest friends and was involved with his estate after he died. And just, I really wanted to sort of choose works that I think really drew out a lot of these, not necessarily similarities, but a lot of these sort of the dialogue between the two artists' practices. So for example, I wanted to include a work like Hornby Island, which was Theodore's 1975 work that he did as part of his BFA at UBC, which was an endurance work in which he sort of tied himself to these two posts, and he kind of was on these posts as long as he could endure the pain. And I wanted to sort of do a sight line between the Hornby Island book, which will be on a vitrine, and also the Paul Wong work, Intensity, which is a work which was also an endurance piece in which he sort of danced around and moshed in this sort of padded cube. And I wanted to they were both sort of interested in things like endurance and performance, pushing the body to its limits, but also how to use the camera, photography in the case of Theodore, and video in case of Paul Wong. I thought the Richmond Art Gallery was a very good place to have this exhibition and this show, because we do have, sort of a very large community of individuals of Chinese descent and Chinese diasporic individuals. And actually, our director, Sean Dacey, kind of, in one of our early meetings, he told me what he kind of got excited about with this show. And he said the potential of this show is, for sort of a young person who's like maybe feeling, marginalized or othered and doesn't feel like they fit in, to sort of come to the show. This could be, any sort of othered person. It could be, a LGBTQ identified person, as Paul is, or it could be a person of a sort of a racial or an ethnic minority. They could come to this show and know that, there was artists and individuals dealing with sort of similar problems and similar issues 40, 50 years ago, and to sort of see themselves maybe within this sort of lineage of people sort of dealing with these same issues and struggles. And also, I thought it was important for Richmond to host the show to be interconnected and in discourse with what was going on in Vancouver, because a lot of this stuff was going on in the sort of lower mainland region. Just to sort of have people understand that there was this really exciting history, and there was these really exciting Chinese Canadian artists that were working 40, 50 years ago. And Paul is working up until today.